And here he goes into it a little bit in the most simplistic and so obvious way. Boys with a normal viewpoint were taken out of the fields and offices and factories and classrooms and put into the ranks. They were remolded. They were made over. They were made to about face, to regard murder as the order of the day. They were put shoulder to shoulder, and through mass psychology, they were entirely changed. We used them for a couple of years and trained them to think nothing at all of killing or of being killed. Then, suddenly, we discharged them and told them to make another about face. This time they had to do their own readjustment without mass psychology, without officers' aid and advice, and without nationwide propaganda. We didn't need them anymore. So we scattered them about with any 3-minute or Liberty Loan speeches, or without any 3-minute or Liberty Loan speeches or parades. Too many of these fine young boys are eventually destroyed mentally because they could not make that final about face alone. That's pretty straightforward. And he gives a example here. He says, in the government hospital in Marion, Indiana, 1,800 of these boys are in pens. 500 of them in a barracks with steel bars and wires all around the outside of the buildings and on the porches. These already have been mentally destroyed. These boys don't even look like human beings. Oh, the look on their faces. Physically, they are in good shape. Mentally, they are gone. There are thousands and thousands of these cases, and more are coming in all the time. The tremendous excitement of the war, the sudden cutting off of that excitement, the young boys couldn't stand it. I'm going to have to dig into that. I'm going to have to get some research going on that, because that sounds horrific. (1,800 men, boys, he's calling them, but this is 1935. You know, the war ended in 1918, so these are young men, and you just don't hear about this. You hear about it now. You don't hear about it from World War I. And in fact, World War II, I've talked about, like, well, you know, in World War II, you got to come home on a ship with some other guys, and you got to decompress for 5 or 6 weeks, and you were held up as a hero and all this stuff, and that's why it was easier to adapt. It's like, no, what about World War I? And that freaking psychotic war.
Yeah, I mean, everything that's in my mind obviously has to be tempered with the fact that I truly cannot claim to appreciate the reality that he's describing. He said he's been to basically talking about VA hospitals. He's been to 18 different VA hospitals. This is a passion for him. He's going around seeing what's going on. And at least in this sense of when you think about World War II, that there was this, and I got to assume it was felt at the time, this very clear sense of good and evil, right and wrong, and the sides that we are on, and the justification and the necessity, the global necessity. And if you think about World War I, to at least try to reconcile the loss and what was it for and what was really at stake and how much blurry or not, just when you don't feel that in World War I. And you talk about probably a nation that's just totally ill-equipped to have a 25-year-old come back after seeing what they saw without even being able to say, hey, I at least saved the world, you know, from Holocaust or nuclear war, or whatever could have been at stake by the end of World War II, and being totally ill-equipped to know how to even handle that.
At least in modern times, right? You're at least a little bit desensitized, right? You seen horror movies. You seen blood and guts. You're playing first person shooter video games. Like this is. Can you imagine coming from freaking Omaha, Nebraska, where you're like going to school? You know, I mean, you're just a normal kid. That might not even be the best example because at least in Omaha, Nebraska, you're slaughtering pigs. You're shooting guns. Yeah. But if you're in whatever, if you're from the city and you're just not around that, you're not seeing it. And then boom, you're thrown into World War I.
Yeah.
And there was another section that I know about Smedley Butler. There was a point, I think it was when he was in China, where he for the first time saw like mass slaughtered Japanese. And it's just one of those points that he had seen some real violence, and that was before World War I. But yeah, at least nowadays, this might be a bad thing, is that people are desensitized somewhat. You know, go on whatever, YouTube. I don't know, does YouTube filter out like heinous shootings and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So where do you see stuff like that nowadays?
Oddly, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but oddly they had a few websites out there that you could just go. You know, they say click here, make sure you're 18, whatever, and then you can watch whatever sick video you want. But as I've noticed, not that I frequent these things, but as I've noticed, they've been kind of disappearing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I remember there was a video of a Russian soldier being killed by a Chechen. Yeah. And it's brutal. They're putting his boot on his head and they're just he's screaming and they're cutting his throat and he's sort of like slowly the impact of the knife blade.
Yeah, that's old school. There's way worse stuff.
I'm saying that's old school, but I haven't seen that in a long time. Yeah. But I'm sure there's like some websites where you can just see all that stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they're kind of quietly doing away with them. Maybe because they encourage certain like groups to be like, oh, let's see if we can put ours up, you know, because in that dark area of the internet, it's like the people who are responsible for making those videos. Sometimes they get into these little competitions to see who can make the sickest video.
Well,
and they go hard for sure.
Even if you just saw rated R movies, you would be more accustomed to this kind of scenery.
Oh yeah,
right?
and you have like the exposure of what war actually is way more now compared to that time like that.
Hey, if you watched Saving Private Ryan, you're like, okay, man. I mean, this is.
Oh yeah.
And there's plenty of reports that World War II veterans that were at D-Day were totally thought that nailed it, and they were very disturbed in watching it, and had to take a break, had to walk out, whatever, because it was so realistic. So that's going to condition you. But if you leave freaking Maryland, where you live in a small neighborhood and your dad works at the factory, and next thing you know, you're in World War I. And then all of a sudden 3 weeks later you're back in Maryland. In your neighborhood. It's going to be a rough one.
That's a good way to put it. I was like, hey, they take you out of your normal world and make you do an about face with all this essential training and like all this this influence and stuff. And then when that's done, just all of a sudden, hey, do another about face, but hey, do it on your own kind of a thing. It's like, dang, that's exactly what happens, huh?
You know that song by the White Buffalo that he played when he was on here? It's called Wish It Was True. Yeah. Well, when he was on here, he played that song, and I actually had like asked him to play.
The slow one.
Yeah, and but the song, it's got a line in there that basically says, "Hey, you're just a number, and we used you, and you're through." And there's a couple people that left some comments or hit me up like, "This is an anti-war song. What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Hey, bro, this is what happens. It doesn't happen all the time, but this is a song written from someone's individual viewpoint of, hey, went to war, whatever war it was. Maybe it was World War I, World War II, World War Korea, Vietnam. There's plenty of people that went to those wars, came home, and this is exactly what happened. That's what that song is about. It's not saying, oh, you just got used by every single soldier. It's not saying that. But this happens. This does happen, and that's why it's such a powerful song.
This might sound a little bit insensitive, but Rambo. That's what that story was essentially about. When you watch First Blood, right? Like that's essentially what it was about. That's what it's about. And then they of course they do him dirty again, send him to jail, and then Rambo 2, they're like, oh wait, we need that guy again. let's go get that guy. And then they try to do him dirty again. See what I'm saying?
That is essentially the story.
Yep.
And it's not. And look, there's plenty of people that come home from war and they're able to deal with it. And they go, cool, you know what? I did what I had to do, and now I'm going back to the work. I'm going back to the factory. I'm going back to the construction site. Going back to the insurance business that I'm running or that I work at. Like, it's people do, and they also saw different things. What did this person see? They'll do different things. What did this person do? So we got to take all these things into account. But like you just pointed out, Echo, the fact that you're going to take hundreds of thousands of people in World War I, in World War II, you're going to take hundreds of thousands of people and train them to kill. And then when it's over, you're like, cool, we're good. Hey, appreciate it. Yeah. See you later. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Eugene Sledge, I mean, he had a really hard time when he came home from war. And he still carried on with his normal life. I mean, actually, all those guys did. Yeah. All those guys that were over there had a real hard time. But there's also millions of veterans that came home and like, they carried on with their life. Yeah. I mean, I mean, I've had him on this podcast. I mean, Charlie Plum. How does he come home from 6 years of captivity and it's just like, okay, cool. Well, we're going to move on. Yeah. William Reeder. By the way, William Reeder, 40 years, like stayed in the Army for another, 38 years, doing his job, getting a fit rep. How do you write a fit rep for William Reeder? How do you not just say, hey, sir, look, I'm supposed to be in charge of you. You just tell me what you want to do. Because you have done more for the military than I could have ever hoped to have done. And I appreciate you sitting here and not like beating me up or whatever, not counseling me on what an idiot I am. So there's plenty of people that come home and they are. Now I will say this, and Charlie Plum pointed this out to me. The amount of like post-traumatic stress that the guys that were in the Hanoi Hilton had was less on average than normal infantrymen. And it's because they had this camaraderie. At least that's what he said. At least I think I remember what he said. But they had this camaraderie, so it was like, hey, we were all, and they had time to process it, and then they got this huge, beautiful welcome home. And I mean, it was Jim Searlesley. I think it was Jim Searlesley when he's lost both legs and his arm, and the guys came home from being POWs with the white, with the big reception. And he was like, hey, bro, I understand you guys were held captive. I'm sorry. I got back and just went to a freaking rehab for 9 months, and then I'm out here with one arm. So that probably helped the guys that were captives in Vietnam as well, is that they got a very warm welcome home. And as we know, a lot of Vietnam veterans did not get a warm welcome home. And from what it sounds like here, same thing, World War I. Oh, the look on their faces. Physically, they're in good shape. Mentally, they are gone.
Yeah. I wrote that down too. That the metaphor that he describes about we take them, we have them do an about face, and then we have them doing another about face, and they can't do that second one.
We have them do the second one on their own.
They can't do it. It's not unreasonable to think, and I was literally just thinking about who are you if you're a 21, 22-year-old male in 1914 going to World War I? Who are you? And it's not unreasonable to think that they had no idea what war was, period. What war was. And if you think about today, like joining the military, to your point, at least some exposure is accessible to anybody. You have some idea what war is.
You've seen Platoon. You've seen Full Metal Jacket. You've seen Saving Private Ryan. You've seen Apocalypse Now. You've seen all these movies.
Yes. And it's in the national psyche too. People are talking about it. People have been talking about it. If you were in World War I and you're 20, I mean, there's historians that probably do some math, but like this, unless you have some connection to the Civil War, which ended 50 years ago, and you're getting stories from your grandpa, you have no idea what war is. And then you're going to World War I, where the use of human capital, the use of a human being was less significant than any other piece of material that was out there. And today, like, I did 23 years in the Marine Corps, and I retired like 5 years ago. It's like 30 years coming up on my military experience. We take excessive, sometimes tactically unsound lengths to preserve American lives. Now, obviously, we know that doesn't always work out, but we don't, by design, waste lives. And you can kind of almost count on that. Like, hey, there are no more human waves. There's no more, hey, listen, gents, have a seat. Let's talk about this plan. We know we're all going to get wiped out, but we have to go do this. Like, those conversations aren't really happening. And so you kind of know what you're getting into a little bit, at least softens that a little bit. You know what war is, some idea what the war is going to be like. I can't imagine a bigger contrast of being 19 years old. Hey, you're going to Europe. And like, hey, where is that? Okay, cool, it's here. Yeah. Hey, what country is that? That's this country here. Okay, who are we fighting? These people over here. Oh, how is this going to work? Well, when you get there, we'll show you. Okay.
Cool.
And then you see World War I.
Yeah.
The second about face to do on your own.
Yeah, it's going to be a rough one.
It's not going to work out, right? And he's now touring the country going, yeah. And yeah, the frustration is, should we probably take a couple of those dollars? I mean, the sarcasm with just should we take a couple of those dollars and maybe help these folks with that about face? These patriots over here making money? Again, and this is just me saying, I can appreciate this point of view.
You get where he's coming from.
I get where he's coming from. And this is not some coward. This is not some this is not a dude who's sitting on the sidelines casting judgment. This is a guy who for whatever got back in the. This is a guy who can speak, from a first person point of view.
Certainly can.